The present work contains the whole of the Syriac text of Lady Me's manuscript of the Book of Paradise, according to the recension of Anan Isho, which also includes the lives of the monks written by Jerome and others, about 1200 sayings of the fathers. Which also includes the lives of the monks written by Jerome and others, and about 1200 sayings of the fathers. To all these tolerably literal English translations are appended. That the work may be as complete as possible, I have given translations of all the additional histories and sayings which Père Bejan has printed in the 7th volume of his Acta Sanctorum, and in a few places where the Syriac version is of interest. I have reprinted his text. Thus the reader has before him, thanks to Lady Me's munificence, a complete English translation of Anan Isha's recension of the Book of Paradise, and I trust that it will be found useful not only by the theological critic, but also by those who are students of the religion, folklore, magic, and social condition of Egypt in early Christian times. Lady Me has printed 500 copies both of the text and translation, and on my part I have spared no pains to bring this lengthy work of some 2,000 pages to as successful a conclusion as possible. The notes have, from sheer necessity, been made as brief as possible, but Bible references to quotations in the text have been given in most cases. Any attempt to deal with the original Greek text was impossible, for such a work would fill a volume by itself, and it must be left to such competent scholars as Proshin and Butler. An index of proper names has been added, which it is hoped may facilitate reference. The Nestorian vowel points are, of course, modern, and may for critical purposes be disregarded. They are interesting, however, as showing the class of mistake which modern Nestorians make when reading and copying ancient works. The Syriac scholar can correct these mistakes for himself, and the general reader need not concern himself about them. The English translation has been made as literal as possible, and all the words supplied by me have been placed in square brackets. The meaning of some passages in the Syriac text. The English translation has been made as literal as possible, and all the words supplied by me have been placed in square brackets. The meaning of some passages in the Syriac text is doubtful, either because the translator from the Greek did not understand his text, or because I have failed to grasp the meaning of his rendering. It is now my pleasing duty to offer to Lady Me my heartfelt thanks for giving to me the opportunity of making the Book of Paradise known in an English translation, and for publishing a work which, but for her effective help and sympathy, could never have seen the light in its present form. Mr. Dragulin of Leipzig and Dr. Chamizer of his firm deserve praise for the great care and attention which they have bestowed upon the printing of these volumes. E. A. Wallace Budge, London, November 16th, 1903. The comparatively few facts which are known of the life of Palladius are derived almost entirely from his own writings, and there are many periods in his life about which exact information would be of great importance for the understanding of the Book of Paradise, by which work he has immortalized himself. He was probably born in Galatia about the year 367, and in the 20th year of his age, 386, he became a monk. According to Tillemont, he first practiced asceticism in Cappadocia under the direction of Elpidius, the abbot of a monastery. From Cappadocia he went to Bethlehem, probably in 387, and from that village to Jerusalem, where he met Melania and Rufinus. In the second consulship of the Emperor Theodosius, the Great, i.e., the Great, in the second consulship of the Emperor Theodosius the Great, i.e., in 388, he went to Alexandria and became the disciple of Isidore, who took him to a place 6 miles from the city and handed him over to Dorotheus, the Theban, who had lived in a cave for 60 years. With this ascetic, he lived for nearly 3 years, endeavoring to learn to subdue, endeavoring to learn to subdue the passions of the body. For Palladius himself says that he needed not only the word but also the labor of the body and severe physical exercises, even like the young unbroken animal. This, however, he was unable to effect, for a severe illness made it necessary for him to leave Dorotheus, and he returned to Isidore. About this time he visited the monk Didymus, and went to all the principal monasteries near Alexandria, and conversed with nearly 2,000 monks. He then sailed for a day and a half across Lake Mareotis, and came to Mount Nitria, where 600 monks lived. Here he dwelt for a year, and then he withdrew to the inner desert, and made his abode in that part of which is called the cells, where he remained for 9 years, 3 of which he passed in close intercourse with Macarius the Alexandrian. In 399, Palladius again fell sick with a sore sickness, which was caused by my kidneys and stomach. And the brethren, fearing that he was becoming dropsical, sent him to Alexandria to consult the physicians, who advised him to go to Palestine, and he set out for that country. Soon after this, he departed to Bithynia, where the air was temperate and light, and beneficial for his body. And here, according to the prophecy of John of Lycus, whether by the care and solicitude of men, or whether by the will of God, he knew not, he was made a bishop. Palladius does not tell us who consecrated him or where his see was, but as he says that he became an associate in the trial which rose up against the blessed John, he must have been an adherent of John Chrysostom. And if this be so, he was consecrated by that bishop, and his see was Drepanum, or Helenopolis in Bithynia. He seems to have suffered persecution because of his friendship for John Chrysostom, for he tells us that he was secluded for a period of about 11 months in a dark cell, but whether he was actually imprisoned in the dark cell or lay there of his own accord in hiding cannot be said. In 404 or 405 he fled to Rome, where he was received in the house of Pinlanus, who treated him with great kindness. When he left Rome, he wished to go to Constantinople, but he and his friends were not allowed to land when they arrived there. And each member of the party to which he had attached himself was shut up in a separate chamber in the fortress of Atyre. When they refused to withdraw from their allegiance to John Chrysostom, the decree of banishment was pronounced against them, and Palladius was deported to Syene, Aswan, in Upper Egypt. During his banishment from his bishopric, he spent 4 years in Antinoe of the Thebaid, where he tells us dwelt 1,200 monks who worked with their hands, and he learned concerning the whole of the system of the religious houses which were there. According to Tillemont, the severity of the edict of banishment against Palladius was relaxed on the death of Theophilus in 412, and he was permitted to leave Syene, but it was not until 417 that his restoration to his diocese was possible. Whether he returned to Helenopolis, we know not, but according to Socrates, he was translated about 432 from that see to Aspuna in Galatia Prima. Between 417 and 420, Palladius set to work on the compilation of the Book of Paradise, and it was finished in the year 420. The year of his death is unknown. In the summary of the years of his life given by Palladius in this work, he says, I lived a life of rule and was in a monastery of solitary brethren for the first part of my life. That is to say, until the 33rd year of my age, and I served the office of bishop for 20 years. Thus the whole period of my life hath included 56 years. But 33 and 20 only make 53, and as he himself gives the total years of his life as 56, some short sentence which would tell us the way in which he spent the other 3 years may have dropped out of the Syriac text. The Book of Paradise was written at the request of one Lausus, who was the chief chamberlain in the royal household, which has been generally assumed to be that of Theodosius II. It was dedicated by Palladius to this God-fearing man, and for this reason it is commonly known as the Lausiac history. Palladius describes his friend as a man whose mind is full of doctrine, whose habits are those of a lover of peace, who feareth God in his heart, and who loveth Christ in his mind. In the preface to his work, Palladius tells Lausus that he will relate to him the story of ascetics, whom he was held to be worthy to see face to face, and that he will set down in writing with exactness the things which he has seen. As far as a man could walk, Palladius went through cities and towns and visited the caves and holes in the ground and the booths in the desert wherein the monks lived, so that he might collect his information at first hand. In the course of his work, he traveled in Libya, Egypt, including the Thebaid, and the regions of Tabenna and Syene in Syria, and Palestine and in Mesopotamia, and also in Italy. And he says, in travels and journeyings, I would have trodden the whole of the territory of the Greeks, so that I might have the opportunity of conversing with each of the lovers of God. In fact, when we sum up the amount of time which Palladius spent in investigating the lives and deeds of the monks, we find that it amounts to more than 30 years, and it is doubtful if any other human being ever devoted such a large portion of his life to a similar occupation. There was probably no kind of Christian monk which was unknown to him, and if an ascetic enjoyed a reputation for any special virtue or Christian quality, and the report of him reached Palladius, no cave or hole in the earth or booth or habitation was too remote or wretched for him to visit. And it would seem that his tact and sympathy enabled him to extract exactly the kind of information which he wanted. It is nevertheless very hard to understand why a man who suffered as Palladius did from serious internal ailments should have voluntarily undertaken long journeys into the desert and endure necessarily hunger and thirst and heat and cold instead of sitting down quietly in some monastery or religious house and living the ascetic life in a moderate fashion. We know not whether he was a man of great private means or not, but it is quite clear that if he lived for years at a time in places like the Nitrian mountain and the monasteries of Tabenna and Antinoe, and among the most strenuous of monks, his life must have conformed closely to theirs, and that he must have been regarded by every kind of ascetic as a fellow laborer in the rule of stern self-abnegation. The great value of the Book of Paradise, to say nothing of its charm, consists in the fact that the author informs the reader when he is describing what he has actually seen, and when he is recording the things which he has collected on hearsay evidence. And moreover, he kept nothing back from his friend Lausus, and he hid nothing from him. And although he wished the lives of the ascetics which he related to him to form an example which would guide him to the loftiest heights of Christian virtue, he did not fail to set down in them the details of the sins which certain holy men committed, and he narrated cases of their apostasy with all due care. Palladius was a truthful and an impartial observer of the ascetics and their lives, and he mentions their foibles and their weaknesses with the same minuteness as their greatest virtues. In every narrative which may be taken to have been written by Palladius himself, we find that the facts of the case and the facts only are given, and that the author's comment everywhere is surprisingly small. We know that Palladius was a monk and that he possessed well-developed ascetic sympathies, but his histories are at times so lacking in expression of personal feeling and opinion that they might almost be the work of a conscientious student of a particular phase of development of human thought, who is so anxious to write down his facts in a truthful and unbiased manner that his work becomes quite colorless. The matter might be better understood if we knew more of the friendship which existed between Lausus and Palladius, and what real reason the former had in urging the latter to write the Book of Paradise. Lausus had no doubt heard of the extraordinary attraction which the monastic life possessed for people of all classes, and how men and women dispersed their possessions and withdrew to the desert and gave themselves up to a life of hardness and self-denial, according to their power to endure the ascetic rule. That a man who was a Christian eunuch at the court of Theodosius II should wish to know about the lives of the Egyptian monks and nuns is natural enough, and it is possible that his royal master may have wished him to procure a report on the subject. But if this were so, we should expect to find more general historical facts and dates in the work of Palladius, whereby his statements might be checked or controlled. The lack of historical data is, however, one of the reasons which the critics of the Book of Paradise have urged against the authenticity of the work. But with me, this has small weight, for the local color in all that concerns Egypt and its inhabitants is so correct that everyone who has traveled in the deserts and mountains of that country feels that the descriptions given of them by Palladius could only have been written by one who had himself passed through them